So I've been reading a lot of One Piece lately. No, we're not going to talk about it. You clicked on this thumbnail, so you know what the video's about. I promise I'm going somewhere with this, though. Just hold on. In the depths of last year's wintry despair, I decided that Adventures on the High Sea would be the perfect reprieve from the absolute hell that was waking up every day. My actual history with One Piece is a little more complicated than that, but 'tis a tale for another time. I read all the way through the pre-time skip era, and I tried to do Sakana no Hito no Shima, but the rum was gone and it was time to return to port. The voyage was fun, for sure, but I was so tired by the end that I had basically no plans to return to the series anytime soon, maybe even ever. Flash forward to September 2023. Fall arrived with a new semester, life got sad again, and hey, Dressrosa is pretty cool. Oda was once again occupying my otaku hours. But I read One Piece on my phone, so in the purely hypothetical situation where I drop said phone approximately 24 inches onto a university sidewalk, case side down, leading to the logical conclusion where it fucking explodes, I would have no way to continue the series. Now, like I said, this is purely a hypothetical. On an unrelated note, I finally found the time to start Bungo Stray Dogs. Bungo Stray Dogs has been an ever-present non-factor in my life for a while now. Every time I scroll through Crunchyroll's homepage to rewatch a Naruto fight, there it sits. And I think, that looks kinda cool. Anyway, every time I go to my local Barnes & Noble and make my way to the manga section in the back corner, head on a swivel to make sure no one of significance is witness to my sin, I see the whole collection just sitting there. And I think, that looks kinda cool. Anyway, I had fully intended to let this one eternally decompose on the tail end of my backlog, but after the whole I no longer have contact with any aspect of humanity now within a 2-mile radius of me incident, I needed something to watch. I finished Kekkai Sensen a little while back, which I'm absolutely going to make a video about someday, so why not take one step to the right into the studio's next production? Oh, anime, Studio Boned. I like Bones. They made both of my 2 favorite anime of all time, so this will probably be at least pretty good, right? Well, about that. The real reason I never gave Bungo Stray Dogs a chance is because I looked it up one time and basically everybody said the first season was kinda bad and that it got better later. I didn't really have the patience to slog my way through 12 bad episodes to get something good when I could just watch The Promised Neverland again, so I didn't. At present though, I'm finally mentally unstable enough to invest 4 hours into a show that I kinda swore was gonna be about British people. I really don't know why. And damn, you guys weren't wrong. It ain't great. But it also isn't that bad either. I mean, at least it isn't about Britain. In my opinion, the anime community is losing its grip on the meaning of mid. Good shows are mid, bad shows are mid, everything is mid these days. Stop it! Bungo Stray Dogs Season 1 is what true mid looks like. Which brings me to the first and easiest topic on my mind. Production. In this day and age, most of the big anime fall into what I'd call the prestige TV category. You know, you got Jujutsu Kaisen, Mushoku Tensei, Demon Slayer, Man of the One Punch or Chainsaw varieties. Shows get popular off the promise of having some standout element of production basically every episode, making it kinda hard to thrive with mediocre animation and direction unless you're already a well-established property like Boruto or One Piece. The last one isn't even a very good example anymore, apparently, with things I've heard about Wano, and even Bleach has been climbing the prestige levels recently. It is within this environment that Bungo Stray Dogs languishes a bit, because it just isn't prestige TV. That statement makes the show sound worse than it is. Bunghole Gay Pogs is not a poorly produced show. This is Bones, after all. They've got a lot of experience and a lot of very talented animators. They released Mob Psycho 100, the most beautiful show ever made, this very same year. And I'd suspect that's part of the problem. If you're currently making this, you don't have all the resources in the world to dedicate to this. Probably not how animation studios work, but the overall point is that Bungo Stray Dogs is a lesser Bones production, which still makes it competent at the very least. It may not have ever blown me away like its sister shows, but it was never frustrating or distracting. There are even points where it gets quite good, like the animation of episode 10's climactic fight and some other smaller individual cuts. My favorite aspect was probably the soundtrack, which was pretty enjoyable across the board. Hard to complain when you got the guy that composed for Soul Eater and Battle Tendency, I guess. Like I said, not a badly produced anime. It's mid, high mid at best, which means it can't God of High School itself into quality just by being an eyegasm. It has to have an actual good story. So how does it fare as a story? I mentioned a bit ago that Kekkai Sensen, or Blood Blockade Battlefront, is one of the shows I finished most recently. It's also the last Bones show I watched. I only bring it up because I really wasn't expecting Bungo Stray Dogs to be the exact same story. Don't believe me? Check it. A nice and considerate teenage boy with a low sense of self-worth and a bizarre bodily modification that makes him the target of bounty hunters and the like moves to a new strange city where he has a chance encounter with a secret organization of warriors with supernatural powers and quirky personalities who take jobs from various other parties in the city in order to maintain peace. They then recruit him. Along the way, he bonds with a teenage girl who ends up being connected to the main villain, who uses their bond as a way to get close to the main character so he can kidnap him for his strange body. All the while, the bulk of the story manifests as a series of episodic, character-driven plotlines, while the primary narrative simmers in the background. Yeah, they're the same show. Except Kekai Sensen was way better at it. The first season of Bungo Stray Dogs has its feet in two worlds. On one side, there's what it wants to be, a big blockbuster narrative-driven shonen series. On the other side, there's what it is, Kekai Sensen. All this is probably meaningless if you haven't seen the big Triple B, which you probably haven't, so I'll explain. Kekai Sensen's manga is simply an episodic action comedy, and although there is an original main plotline grafted onto it, the anime is much the same. Because of its genre and focus, the show is structured into self-contained 1 or 2 episode plotlines, each featuring different members of the cast. One episode you'll be watching a Klaus-centric game of 5D para-universal chess, and the next you'll see Leo try to solve racism by pumping money into the McDonald's Corporation. Since the show is mostly just trying to have a lighthearted good time, go away, we're not talking about you right now, this structure works out great. It's charming, it's breezy, it's fun, just a nice feel-good experience. Most of Bungo Stray Dogs is composed similarly, containing about 11 individual stories within its 12-episode run. The difference and problem here is that the story really wants to have a main plot as well without actually dedicating to it. Out of the 11, only about 5 of these stories have a connection to or move the core narrative forward, with a few of those ties being pretty tangential. This wouldn't be much of a problem if we were merely setting pieces on the board for future moves, but the show is also dead set on resolving the overarching plot within the season. Trying to do all that in 5 episodes while also having a billion characters is basically impossible, and I think they know that, which is why they compensate by leaking core plot elements into the episodic ones. What do I mean? Well, Ryunosuke Akutagawa, pronunciation is hard, is the main antagonist of this season, and his goal is to kidnap and sell Atsushi. However, he also shows up in the middle of the 2-episode Kanikida-focused Azure King plotline for basically no reason. He's not really trying to kidnap Atsushi, the plot isn't being developed, he's just kinda here, being a distraction. A wealth of choices like this makes the narrative unnecessarily sloppy. I find it so strange that the climax happens in episode 10, then they spend episode 11 just dicking around, then episode 12 starts a whole new central storyline, and then the show just fucking ends. Like, why? At the very least, get rid of some of the tonal whiplash by moving that Kenji subplot to before Kyoka shows up. So the central storyline is undercooked, and the episodic plotlines barely fare any better. I had heard the term armed detective agency before starting the show, but I really didn't expect this to be an actual detective series where they solve cases and shit. Bungo Blue Bloods. I was surprised, but not disappointed. I like mysteries, and the case-by-case framework fits really well with the goal of world building by allowing the audience to more deliberately explore different aspects of it. Kekai Sensen does this fantastically, even if it isn't really a detective story. Every episode teaches us about some crazy new element of Reverse Salem Lot's culture or function, which is why it's so easy to get attached to that world. Bungo Stray Dogs basically fails on all fronts. I don't know jack shit about this world, and the show is insistent on not teaching me. What is the Armed Detective Agency? How do they interact with the government and the police at large? Are they a government agency? What about the Port Mafia? Do they use bribes and inside contacts like real-life mafia organizations? Or are they just terrorists who haven't been caught yet? Why are there military police in operation? Is this city in a state of martial law? If so, why? Where the fuck are we? I wasn't confident the series even took place in Japan until episode 6 when they straight up say they're in Yokohama. Tell me anything. Please, sir, may I have some TV show? The drip feed of information only begins in earnest during the final episode, by which point it's kinda too late. The part that hurts the most about this bizarre auto-cannibalistic structure is that either side could have been pretty good if focused on. Right around episode 9 and 10, we get a look into some of the Port Mafia's internal politics, and it starts to get pretty interesting. I actually want to learn more about their hierarchy, Dazai's past, his relationships with Akutagawa and Chuya, etc. Especially Chuya. Don't ask why, I just think he looks cool. He's got a nice little hat. Masu aside. If the whole season was dedicated to this subject matter, probably would have been pretty cool. Playing for the other team, this also could have been good as a purely episodic show. Not every individual case gets an appropriate runtime to set up all of its evidence points, but the ones that hit are really enjoyable. The Azure King and Murder on D Street plotlines in particular stand out as well-written bursts of intrigue, and it's no wonder that the characters they focus on are my favorites. Thinking about it in retrospect, the season probably would have done an even better job at being a setup release for the grander story if they went that route and focused purely on world and character building. Regardless, either route would have worked, but they chose neither. The best way I can sum it up is that instead of dipping their brush into the paint and making careful strokes, they dumped the whole can on the canvas and started pushing it around trying to make the Mona Lisa, but they ended up with just, at best, a Rorschach test. Well, let's rewind a few sentences and go back to that character segue that I set up and ignored. The cast of Bungo Stray Dogs is one of its more enjoyable elements. It's by no means consistent, but there's enough personality overall that I could see you getting attached. Atsushi Nakajima is the main protagonist, and he's kinda milquetoast in all honesty. The scene never suffers because he's in it, but it's also usually not made any better either. I do really like his setup and the idea of his motivations, though. I'm a sucker for characters who need to accept it's okay for them to be alive, wonder why, and I've definitely seen it done worse. With proper development in future seasons, I could easily see him becoming a compelling main character. As long as they ditch that fucking orphanage flashback. Take a shot every time you see this scene of Atsushi being abused in an orphanage. Seriously, try it. The only way to get that much alcohol would be to siphon it directly from my bloodstream. The fact that they feel like they need to remind me of his character arc every single time it becomes relevant is an insult to my intelligence.
Quit your sobbing, you useless brat!
I know!
Children!
Moving on to some characters I like a lot more than that, Dazai and Kunikida. These guys have the most screen time after Atsushi, and that investment is actually worthwhile. As partners, the core dynamic between the two men is not exactly unfamiliar. Carefree, competent slacker, and uptight rule follower. Good cop, bad cop. A time-honored formula, if not a particularly novel one. Novel doesn't equate to good, though. Solid execution can refresh an old idea, and that's what we've got here. Their interactions are consistently the funniest in the show, and their opposite personalities make it all the more satisfying when they pull together as a team to actually get shit done. Plus, each one is a fairly compelling character on their own. The writers chose to further enforce their status as foils by endearing the audience to them in opposite ways. We get close to Kunikida by learning direct information about his past and where the strength of his ideals comes from, opposed by how affection for Dazai is fostered through mystery. The variety provided by this anathemic execution helps emphasize each character's personality without being redundant, and is more than enough to keep an audience member invested. Not at all hindered by just the fucking pure enigma that is the latter. Dazai's dedication to the art of suicide is certainly unique, I'll say that. I think they overplay it as a joke a bit, but it does serve as an effective point of intrigue, and I'd be lying if I said I didn't think his goal of finding a hot woman to commit double suicide with wasn't funny. The rest of the characters range from good asterisk to whatever. Akutagawa is an effective physical threat, and I can see the basis of his motivation becoming interesting later on, but I'd need to see more from him first. Rampo initially scared me when I heard his power was just,
look! The problem is over!
But once they explained how he's a genius who only thinks he has powers while going over the logic of his deductions, I breathed a sigh of relief. Then I got worried again. It only happens one other time, but he solves a mystery later in the season when they're trying to find where Atsushi's been kidnapped to, which is no explanation whatsoever. We don't get to see any of his thought process, any of the reasoning, no nothing. And the writers just get to pat themselves on the back and go, well, look at us, we wrote a smart character, what a genius. Having the option to resolve conflicts this easily makes me kinda concerned for the future of the plot. This isn't like anything substantiated, maybe it won't be a problem, but I'm a little worried. It's like having save states on an emulator and promising not to use them. We'll see how that turns out once you get past like chapter 3 of Thracia. He is quite charming outside of that possibility though, so I'm not really mad. As far as everyone else goes, I am concerned about what's happening between Tanizaki and his sister girlfriend, but other than that they're fine. I like Kenji, even if he arguably doesn't exist. Yosano does exist, and that's most of what I can say about her. Kyoka is cute. Who cares about the Port Mafia guys now? I'm sure they'll be important later. Here's the last one I actually want to talk about. The President is not a real character in this story. We learn nothing about him, and he has no personality traits. But they also really want us to think he's the fucking coolest guy on the planet. Their solution? Every time he appears for even a moment, they blast this badass guitar riff.
I just went and asked him for help.
President! Please forgive.
I can't help finding this fucking hilarious. It's like the Daredevil soundtrack. I like to think that this song is diegetic and he has an assistant wheel and amp around everywhere he goes just out of sight so that he can assert his dominance. Like imagine if every time I walked into a room just suddenly Tornado of Souls started playing. That's not quite everything I wanted to cover, but I am officially out of time. Did this video come off as kinda harsh? Because that wasn't my intention. I meant it when I said Bungo Stray Dogs was mid. It's not agony to watch or anything, and it's even pretty good sometimes, but that doesn't erase its issues. I'm aware that this series is pretty beloved, so some fans will probably try to dismiss my criticisms by saying it all plays better in the context of the full series, in an environment where you just hit next episode for 13 straight hours and then get the full thing in one night, but I don't think that's really a fair way to judge it. If you watched the show when it first released, you would have had to wait for a year or so for anything new. It's not a Brotherhood situation where the whole series came out week after week. I'm judging it under its initial context, which is why I haven't even started Season 2 while writing this script. So keep that in mind, and take all my criticisms with a grain of salt, as I don't know the future, but I don't think that invalidates them. But hey, that final episode started to get pretty interesting, so if it gets better like everyone says it does, which I have some faith it will, I'll eat my words. Yep, the whole script. On paper, on camera. Without condiments. I'm not actually going to do that. Until next time.